Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Maddie here, and Spacetime Smackdown is set to release in just a few days, and of course the most popular, or I guess sort of the flagship Pokemon for this new expansion are Dialga and Palkia EX. A lot of people are talking about these two cards. They both look really interesting, so in this video what we're going to do today is come up with some really cool or interesting deck ideas. Basically, we're going to strategize preemptively, what the best ways we can play these cards are, and maybe what kind of decks we can build with these two cards. Now, of course, the elephant in the room is that we don't have all of the cards that are going to be releasing in the Spacetime Smackdown expansion. They haven't all been announced yet. The deck list subject to change. We're going to probably get a lot of different support cards for both Palkia and Dialga EX, but in this video, we're going to just start by, taking a look at maybe preemptively some deck lists or ways that we could be playing these cards. So let's get right into it. The first one that I want to actually talk about in this video is going to be Palkia EX. I think that Palkia is one of the most misunderstood cards that has been announced. I think that a lot of people are kind of sleeping on Palkia EX. It's a lot better, I believe, than a lot of people are giving it credit for. In fact, I actually saw somebody comment that they thought Palkia was just a worse Gyarados EX, and I think that's absolutely ridiculous in my opinion. But we'll have to see, of course, we don't know, but again, in my opinion, this card will end up being very influential in the upcoming metagame. So the thing with Palkia here is that we've got two attacks. It's a basic Water EX Pokemon, 150 HP, retreat cost to 2, weak to electric, but it's got two attacks. The first being Slash, 1 water energy, does 30 damage, and the second attack, Dimensional Storm, does 150 damage. You discard 3 energies when you use this attack, 3 water energies, and you do 20 damage to each of your opponent's benched Pokemon. So it really is kind of a mix between Gyarados' attack and also Mewtwo's attack, but also Articuno's attack. It's really this really interesting combination, but it is extremely strong. I think a lot of people have decided that this attack isn't necessarily that good based off the fact that it discards 3 energies when we use this attack. However, the 20 damage to the your opponent's benched Pokemon, all of your benched Pokemon, is actually really significant on top of the 150 damage. 150 is a really interesting, it's a really perfect number in a lot of ways in Pokemon Pocket. A lot of Pokemon get KO'd and have 150 HP or less, so 150 HP damage for an attack is substantial. 4 energies is kind of a steep attack cost, and yes, discarding 3 energies is tough, but we do have Misty, so it should be fairly easy for us to get 4 energies on Palkia. But here's the thing, the way that we're going to play Palkia EX is that we're going to basically end the game with Dimensional Storm. That's the way this card is meant to be played. We're not going to be attacking with Dimensional Storm over and over again. One, it's going to be difficult to do that because we're discarding so many energies when we do attack, but also we're really susceptible to getting revenge KO'd by other Pokemon that do 150 HP, but also Mew EX does exist, which will be able to copy Dimensional Storm for only 3 energy. So if we're using this attack from Palkia, we basically want to end the game. And the way that we can do that is by actually taking multiple KOs and taking all 2 or all 3 of the points that we need to win the game with just one single attack, killing multiple Pokemon. And the way that we're going to do that basically is throughout this deck here that I have up on the screen is going to be utilizing something like a Kangaskhan and then the Greninja Water Shuriken combination. So the way that I've built this deck and the strategy that I'm employing here with Palkia EX is that we're going to lead off with our Kangaskhan. Kangaskhan is actually, I think, probably, at least at the moment, the best option for this deck. Yes, we could run, other things like maybe a Farfetch'd. The problem with Farfetch'd, though, is that it has less HP, and I do think that Pikachu with the new Pachirisu EX is going to be a very popular deck in the format. So the cool thing with Kangaskhan with 100 HP not being weak to electric type, this is going to really be much more consistently staying alive against those Pikachu matchups, but also it's just 100 HP is a good number in general. It's a little bit less consistent damage than something like a Farfetch'd, but we're going to be wanting to kind of stall out for a little bit more turns rather than do really fast-paced damage. That way we have some time to set up not only the energies on our Palkia, but also evolve our Greninja to, again, get Water Shuriken out, which is going to do additional chip damage, probably to the active spot in the early game. However, we can also target bench Pokemon if needed, and we can take KOs with Water Shuriken as well. But the strategy here with this deck is that we're going to lead off with Kangaskhan. We're going to start hitting with Dizzy Punch. Yes, it's inconsistent, but it does potentially or technically do on average 30 damage. So a couple turns of doing Dizzy Punch. Also, Kangaskhan is a single prize Pokemon, so basically what we're able to do here is get multiple Kangaskhan's in the active spot and attack multiple times, hopefully across 3, 4, maybe even 5 turns to do some consistent damage and chip away on our opponent's Pokemon that's in the active position. Really what we want to do is get that active Pokemon from our opponent down to 20 HP or less, and then hopefully by that time we have Palkia EX set up with Misties and whatnot. When it's time to bring Palkia into the active spot or after our Kangaskhan's get KO'd, we're going to move Palkia EX into the active spot, play a Sabrina, which is going to move that low HP Pokemon from our opponent's active position if it's not already on the bench already, and then we're going to KO the active Pokemon for 150. which again is pretty likely because 150 is a pretty high HP number. Also doing that last 20 damage to that whatever bench Pokemon we've been shipping and doing damage to, taking multiple KOs, hopefully winning the game. That's really the strategy, I think, with Palkia. I think that's how this deck is probably meant to be played. It really is sort of a finishing attack. The combination of Kangaskhan in the early game doing some chip damage, again, we might get a new card to replace Kangaskhan. Could be a better water type Pokemon, or it could be just another colorless Pokemon. We don't know, but it is possible that in the new expansion we get a card that replaces Kangaskhan. But for the most part, I think Kangaskhan is actually a really good fit for this particular strategy. We could run Druddigon. I know some people are probably thinking about running Druddigon. The thing with Druddigon is it's very kind of passive aggressive. Our opponent can always choose to not attack Druddigon. And I think when we're playing Palkia EX, we're very reliant on getting at least one of our opponent's Pokemon down to very low HP. And the most consistent way to do that is to play a little bit more aggressively and have an attacking option in that active spot with Kangaskhan. It only takes 1 energy, so we should have plenty of extra time as well if Kangaskhan lives some hits to use our Misties as the game goes on, but also maybe attach here or there to Palkia directly. So that's why I think, yes, Druddigon would be a little bit better in the sense that we're more consistently going to be able to attach those energies to Palkia EX. In this list, that I'm showing here, Palkia doesn't have like a number on it, but it's because I had to overlay and kind of create this graphic myself. But just imagine here that we're running 2 copies of Palkia in this particular deck list. But yeah, so that's, I think, why Kangaskhan might be a little bit better in this strategy. But overall, that's kind of what we want to do. We want to, be aggressive to, whatever Pokemon is in our opponent's active spot. Most likely, it's going to be some kind of a frontline Pokemon that isn't necessarily the Pokemon they're going to be attaching energies to, so you got to keep that in mind. Really, all we need to do is the combination of Water Shuriken from Greninja in the mid to late game, on top of all of those punches from Kangaskhan. We're going to whittle down one of our opponent's Pokemon, whatever's in the active spot, get it low HP, wait for them to either bring something up into the active spot to take a KO on our Kangaskhan, which that's the other thing you got to mention is like we're able to put a lot of pressure on our opponent without putting Palkia in the active spot, and I think that's going to be really important because we want to force our opponent to, basically bring up their attacking Pokemon or a Pokemon they would attack with. That way we can KO that with Palkia and then, finish off a KO on the bench. So that's what I'm really thinking about this deck list. And I think people are really sleeping on Palkia. Yes, we've seen an attack similar to this with Mewtwo doing 150 damage. We've also seen Articuno, which does spread damage, and the new Raichu from Mythical Island. And those cards are good, but they're not necessarily meta cards. But the thing with those cards is that they're not doing 150 damage to the active spot. It is really a sweet spot number. It's pretty likely that we're going to be able to KO something in the active spot, even in one attack with 150. And even if we can't KO it in one attack, something like an Executor, for example, we do have Water Shuriken in that late game to fix some of that math. So, combined with Water Shuriken, we're doing 170, and that's enough to KO, again, most Pokemon in the game. We also could run Giovanni in the deck if need be. I do think Sabrina and Misty are absolutely necessary here. I would like to play Leaf in the deck. That way, if we do start with maybe a Froakie or a Palkia EX in the deck, we can retreat out into our Kangaskhan without spending too many energies. And that's the other thing to mention that I really like about this deck is that we want to get that early fast-paced damage out, but we also have multiple options to do that. Palkia EX in its own right has that slash attack for only 1 energy doing 30 damage, so even if we did lead with a Palkia EX, we could just choose to kind of stay in and do that chip damage that we would have done with Kangaskhan, but do it with Palkia EX, so it's a very aggressive card in its own right. It's very flexible in that respect, but again, I think the strategy here with this deck and when you're playing Palkia is most likely going to be doing some chip damage to the active Pokemon, not KOing it, but basically putting it down to 20 HP or less, and then playing the Sabrina, KOing a different Pokemon with Palkia EX in the active spot while also KOing that benched Pokemon at the same time. I think that the combination of Kangaskhan Greninja is going to make it actually really easy to do that, and we don't know what other supporter cards we're going to get. I do believe that both Palkia and Dialga will get plenty of additional support cards that we haven't actually seen released yet for Spacetime Smackdown, but since they are sort of the cover art Pokemon for the set, it's pretty safe to assume we're going to get a lot of really decent support cards. The cool thing with Palkia, though, is that Water type in general has a ton of support in its own right. We have Greninja, we have Misties, we have Vaporeon, which we'll see in a little bit. So it's a little bit easier for us to imagine how we would play Palkia, and in my opinion, this is going to be, in general, the best strategy to deploy when we're kind of looking to play Palkia EX. Again, you could swap out Kangaskhan for Druddigon. I don't think it's as good. If you're playing that strategy, again, we don't have to commit energies to anything other than Palkia. So technically, yes, we're being a little bit less aggressive if we're playing Druddigon instead of Kangaskhan or another attacking option Pokemon. And then we can kind of decide to commit fully to attaching energies to the Palkia. And technically, if we get, I think, 6 energies on the Palkia, we can attack turn after turn, 6 or 7 energies, which is doable. However, again, we're very susceptible to getting revenge KO'd. So I think if we're attacking with Dimensional Storm with Palkia, we're going to want to basically end the game on that attack. I think that's probably the most important aspect of Palkia, but it's still very, very strong. I think people are sleeping on it for sure. Let's take a look at the next deck list here that I've, spun up. Okay, in this version of Palkia, we're playing it a little bit differently. We're going to be pairing it with Vaporeon and Starmie. I do think that this isn't as good as the other way to play Palkia EX, but again, it is a card technically that you can just sort of slot in to other decks or other sort of water type decks as sort of an additional attacking option, maybe not the focal point of the deck. This deck is a little bit inconsistent in terms of utilizing Palkia EX because, again, it relies on our Starmies not getting KO'd. There's a lot of Pokemon in the game that can one-hit KO a Starmie, but against maybe some of those aggressive, aggro fighting type decks that don't do a ton of damage, or even other tempo decks like Pikachu, we can live a hit and then retreat out into another Starmie without, losing or getting KO'd and losing those energies, and then we can move them to Palkia late in the game. So that is technically an option for this deck. I do think that it is still a viable way to play Palkia. The other upside, though, to this deck is that we can decide maybe to not even utilize Palkia and just play straight Starmie EX, which can be really decent with Vaporeon in its own right as a decent tempo deck. So this is another option, but again, I don't think this deck or this version or strategy of playing Palkia EX utilizes it as much as the other option, which is, again, that first deck we took a look at, which is really kind of Palkia's the focal point of that deck, and that's how we're winning. This, we're kind of using it as a backup attacking option in some matchups where it could win us the game. Otherwise, we're kind of focusing on Starmie EX. But again, with Palkia, you're going to want to run Sabrina, you're going to want to run Misty. And again, we don't know what other Pokemon we could be getting in the set. We could get some additional support to accelerate water energies to our Pokemon. I think that would be actually really crazy. However, tool cards are coming to Pokemon Pocket in this expansion, so what we could see potentially is a tool card that we could attach to Palkia EX, and it might even increase the damage we do to our opponent's bench Pokemon. So instead of doing 20 damage to our entire opponent's bench, maybe we're doing 30 or 40 damage, which again could be really substantial. There's a lot of opportunities for Palkia to be even better given a lot of the support that it might get in Spacetime Smackdown that we don't actually have yet. But these are the two kind of ways, in my opinion, that we could play Palkia EX, at least given all of the context that we have right now. Again, a lot of things are subject to change once the new cards come out, but in general, I think that these in general are probably the two best strategic ways in which we can incorporate Palkia EX into our decks. And overall, I think that people are really sleeping on Palkia. We've seen it in the official card game. I think a lot of people don't understand how strong it is to be able to take multiple prize cards to basically win the game with one single attack, taking multiple KOs in one turn. Technically, again, like I said, things like Raichu from Mythical Island or Articuno EX are able to do this technically because they do that spread damage, and we've seen how good Greninja can be as well. So that's again another upside to this deck. But the thing with Raichu and Articuno is that their actual attack doesn't do that much damage to the active Pokemon. So it's not oftentimes we're able to one-shot a Pokemon while also KOing a bench Pokemon with that spread damage, whereas Palkia EX can consistently do that. 150 damage is absolutely crazy to also be able to finish off a KO on a Pokemon on the bench and the same attack. So it really is a lot more flexible than people give it credit for. And like I said, yes, it's easily revenge KO'd and it's hard to attack turn after turn because we are discarding energies. But the way that we're going to be using Palkia is to be finishing the game with Dimensional Storm. So we want to set up our opponent's board state in a way that when we do attack with Dimensional Storm, the game will be over once we attack with it. So again, I think people are sleeping on Palkia. Water in general is arguably the best type in the game right now. It's got a ton of support. Gyarados is exceptionally strong. We'll have to see how the meta formulates and how things all get set up, if Gyarados is going to be better than Palkia or if it will remain as a top deck. But the cool thing with Palkia in contrast to Gyarados is that we're doing 150 and not 140. 150 is a much better number than 140. It allows you to KO not only other Palkias, not only Dialgas, but also Mewtwo's and a bunch of other Pokemon as well. So 150, much better than 140. But also, we don't have to evolve. One of the biggest downsides to Gyarados is Magikarp, very easily KO'd by things like Substriko or Hitmonlee, so we got to keep that in mind as well. And I think Palkia being extremely flexible, being able to attack right off the bat with Slash while also being an option to finish games is really, really strong. So if you do lead off with it, it is not useless like a lot of other Pokemon are on their first couple turns. So really, really important to note. I do think that Palkia will probably be a very interesting card in the metagame, and I do think it will be very meta-defining. Again, we'll have to see, but I don't think it's a bad card whatsoever. I really was disappointed, honestly, to see how people were disrespecting Palkia. I think that it's actually a really strong card, and it most likely will be a meta deck. We'll have to see exactly how the meta formulates, but either way, it's a strong card, and it should see some play at the very least. Okay, and next up, let's take a look at Dialga EX and talk about this card a little bit. This was the one out of the two that I think a lot of people were very high on. They were very much expecting Dialga to be very, very strong. Now, I do think Dialga EX is a strong card, but I don't think it's as strong as people were talking about. The example that I'm throwing up here on the screen, again, just keep in mind that we're running 2 copies of this Dialga, even though it doesn't have a number on it. this version of Dialga is probably what a lot of people are keeping in mind. I've kind of combined everything all together in one deck list. Now, Metal is really the only other metal type card that we have available to us right now in the game, but we can expect that there's going to be some other really strong metal type Pokemon, maybe even EX Pokemon that are going to be released in Spacetime Smackdown. It's a Generation 4 set, so I would assume maybe a Bronzong EX or something similar to that is probably going to be really strong, and there's going to be a really powerful and good option to be paired with Dialga. I'm almost confident in that. But the other upside to Dialga is that we can accelerate metal energies to colorless Pokemon or Pokemon of any type, which is really, really strong, which is why I do think things like Tauros and Mew EX are going to be really effective. The other thing you got to keep in mind with Dialga and utilizing things like Tauros and Mew EX is that they only have 3 energies in their attack cost, so all you have to do is use that Metallic Turbo, attack 1 time to accelerate 2 energies to the Tauros or the Mew EX, and the next turn we can manually attach, and that's 3 energies, and then we can go ahead and attack. So Dialga's really interesting. Again, 150 HP, Steel type, basic EX Pokemon. We're weak to fire, again, retreat cost of 2. And then these are the 2 attacks. So we've got Metallic Turbo. It does, for 2 metal energies, does 30 damage, but you can take 2 metal energies and attach them to one of your benched Pokemon. So you can't mix and match. You target one benched Pokemon, accelerate 2 energies to it. And then we have Heavy Impact, 100 damage for 4 energies, 2 metal and 2 colorless. Dialga is a good card. Dialga is actually a bit stronger than I initially thought it was upon first review. When I first looked at Dialga, I thought that it would maybe just be a little bit too slow. That's my opinion. Again, it's similar to Moltres. In fact, very, very similar, but it's a little bit bigger and it's a little bit slower. So that's sort of why I initially looked at it and thought it may not be that good. Because the way I looked at this card was like, okay, we can accelerate energies, but we need 2 energies to do it, which means that if we're going first, we can't actually use Metallic Turbo until our 3rd turn. And that is just very, very slow. And I do think that in matchups where Dialga maybe is going first, it's probably going to be a little bit too slow, and it's going to really kind of fall to the wayside against some maybe faster paced decks or things like Mewtwo that can really pop off on turn 3 or turn 4. However, if we're going second and we can use Metallic Turbo on our 2nd turn, it's actually really, really good. We're doing 30 damage while accelerating that energies. Again, matched up with Tauros, that's actually really significant. 30 damage plus 120 with Tauros. If we're hitting an EX Pokemon, is 150, and again, that's kind of a sweet spot number. And again, all we can do is attack with the Dialga 1 turn, basically get that Tauros or that Mew EX fully set up. Now, again, we're probably going to get some other really strong Pokemon to pair with Dialga, and that's why in a vacuum, I don't think Dialga EX is an incredibly strong Pokemon. I think it's very good, but I think it's balanced in the sense that it's a little bit slower than Moltres, but it's a little bit bigger and it has more damaging potential. And being able to do chip damage while we are accelerating energies is actually really, really powerful, especially in scenarios where if Dialga ever lives for like 3, 4, or even 5 turns, it's going to be very, very difficult to beat any kind of Dialga deck, because you got to understand, we can attack with Metal Turbo for 2 turns if we're still alive, doing 60 chip damage, accelerating 4 energies to one of our bench Pokemon, setting that Pokemon up. But also, if we're still alive after doing all that, we can just attach manually every turn to Dialga and then finish off the KO with Heavy Impact, 100 damage. So 2 30s, that's 60 plus 100, that's 160. That's enough to KO a lot of Pokemon in the game. So in scenarios where Dialga EX just lives for 4 or 5 turns, it is going to be almost unbeatable. Again, however, I think it'll depend on how the meta shifts up. And now here's the other thing to mention with Dialga that's very, very important. Again, we don't know what other support cards are coming with Dialga EX, and I am almost very confident we're going to get a ton of metal type support and Dialga support coming in Spacetime Smackdown. Metal typing or steel typing has been one of the most disrespected types in Pokemon Pocket. Very little amount of Pokemon. In fact, this is the first EX metal type Pokemon that we have so far. There's no metal specific supporter cards or item cards or tool cards. All of those things are likely coming. And so I do think that Dialga is probably going to end up being a really good meta deck. But it's going to be kind of dependent on the Pokemon that we end up pairing with Dialga. And I think that's one of the reasons why in a vacuum, I don't think Dialga is necessarily one of the strongest Pokemon in the game, but it can enable other really strong Pokemon quite nicely. We don't know what those Pokemon are yet. We'll have to see. So the other thing too, like I said about the support cards that could be coming for Dialga, if we get any kind of damage mitigation cards or cards that reduce the damage that we take, similar to Blue, but maybe a little bit more effective, maybe in the form of a tool card or another Pokemon card. Like we got Lucario, which when sitting on the bench buffs the damage of your fighting type Pokemon. Imagine if we had like a metal type Pokemon similar to Lucario, but it reduced the damage that our metal type Pokemon take when they take an attack. And if that ability stacks, that could be absolutely crazy. Basically, any kind of healing factor or damage mitigation factor that we can include with Dialga and in these decks makes it that much better. every turn that Dialga is able to stay alive makes it exponentially that much stronger. So if it gets enough support cards in this deck, like I said, we're running blue, we're running potion. So any cards that we have to allow Dialga rather to stay around for longer, it's going to exponentially make this card that much stronger and make any deck that it's included in that much stronger. So this is the first example. I included Melmetal because that's all we have right now, but I'm expecting that to be replaced again by something maybe like a Bronzong EX. We'll have to see. But I assume there's going to be some other metal type Pokemon that are paired really nicely with Dialga. But for now, all we have is Melmetal, so that is subject to change for sure. But things like Tauros and Mew EX, I think, always have a spot in Dialga decks because they are really useful in some particular matchups. Tauros can be really, really great against other tempo decks. It has 100 HP, so it's got pretty decent survivability, but also we're doing 120 with no downside to EX Pokemon, so we can attack turn after turn if need be. And then Mew EX as well to take some really good revenge KOs. Again, going to be really useful against Palkia EX, Mewtwo again, Charizard, all of the things that Mewtwo is still really good for. It's just going to be really good, I believe, in this next format when Spacetime Smackdown releases. So I do think that for most Dialga decks, it's probably going to make sense for us to incorporate both Tauros and Mew EX in the deck if we do have the space. And like I said, we're running blue and potion in here. Any kind of damage mitigation or healing factors that we can include with Dialga is going to make this card that much better. We want it to stick around for as long as possible. So again, a really sort of preemptive version of this list. This is going to be a very, very different list when this expansion does come out and we see all of the new cards. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But overall, I think the strategy of Dialga is going to be a Pokemon that we want to lead off with. We want to keep alive for as long as possible. And it's really just there, similar to Moltres, to enable other strong cards that we're likely going to pair with Dialga. So that's why, in my opinion, we're probably going to see Dialga EX at the very top of the metagame, because I'm assuming that the cards that are going to come out with Dialga are going to be really, really strong. Some of you might not think it's very useful to make a video like this when we don't have all of those cards available to us or known at the moment, but it's still valuable to kind of understand what these cards do, how we're going to build decks once we get those cards, and what the overall strategies and upsides for these cards are. Now, like I said, the downside to Dialga here is that it isn't that fast. It's not a very good card if we are going first. It's basically useless until our third turn. That can be a little bit unfortunate, especially in a format where there's a lot of decent pace while decks are both fast-paced and really strong. Things like Mewtwo can get fully set up on turn 3, even Charizard or Arcanine and those fire-type decks can get set up on turn 3 or turn 4, so we got to keep that in mind as well. Mewtwo is just Mewtwo, so it's going to stick around for a very, very long time. So those are the matchups I think where Dialga might struggle a little bit, but again, it doesn't necessarily matter if the Pokemon we're pairing with Dialga is exceptionally strong, and we could get some additional, metal energy acceleration, which we don't necessarily have in the format other than Dialga, or that we know of at least, and we'll have to see. So the support cards and the cards that go along, not necessarily supporter cards, but just, supportive cards that we could be paired with any metal type Pokemon are likely coming in Spacetime Smackdown. So we got to keep that in mind as well. Let's take a look at the next Dialga list and talk about that a little bit. All right, and the next version of this deck that I just wanted to take a look at is going to be with Pidgeot EX. Again, I think that it's unlikely, I guess, that colorless Pokemon are running Dialga with these sort of colorless Pokemon is going to be the best way to do it. Again, we do have Pidgeot EX, we do have Wigglytuff EX, so those are options, but those cards in their own right aren't necessarily that strong, and I don't think Dialga is going to make those particular Pokemon any better than they maybe already are in the format right now. So we got to keep that in mind, but again, there could be new colorless Pokemon, so we got to keep that in mind, whether it's a Stage 2 or a Stage 1 Pokemon. The decks are going to look a little bit similar to this. Pidgeot, of course, we're going to run something like a Pokemon Flute, but really for the most part, I just wanted to talk a little bit about Dialga's ability to go well with colorless Pokemon and their attack costs. Somebody did reference to me, though, that technically we can use it with Celebi EX, which is a kind of a meme for sure, but technically Celebi's attack does work with Dialga EX. I just thought that was kind of funny, but overall it wouldn't necessarily make sense to do that because Jungle Totem only doubles the energies of grass type energies, so accelerating a bunch of metal type energies to Celebi could be kind of funny, but overall I don't think it's going to be like a meta strategy, but technically it is funny. So shout out to the people that had mentioned that to me for sure. But yeah, so here's the thing with Dialga is, like, yes, a lot of people are really high on the fact that it does work with colorless Pokemon or Pokemon of any type that do have colorless energy in their attack cost. It's not metal Pokemon specific, it's metallic turbo ability or attack. So yes, that is sort of an upside to Dialga, but again, like, are there other better ways to play those Pokemon other than using Dialga? Like right now for the Mew EX and Tauros combination, the most common way to play those two cards in conjunction with each other is with Exeggutor. Exeggutor is one of the best leadoff Pokemon in the game right now. So, I mean, is playing Dialga in place of Exeggutor really that much better? It could be if we get maybe some additional attacking options, and maybe we want something a little bit more consistent, or something that's a basic Pokemon instead of having to evolve, so it's a little bit more consistent in that respect. But it really just comes down to, like, is there a really strong, like, Metal or EX Pokemon, or a non-Metal EX Pokemon that really benefits from having those energies accelerated to it? Something like a Pidgeot, again, only has an attack cost of 3. So if we have a Metal Pokemon with an attack cost of 4, that's a strong attack, and maybe it's a really high HP Pokemon. Again, any Pokemon that is exceedingly powerful, but maybe a difficult setup, Dialga is going to support that Pokemon in a really nice way, and I think it's going to match up really well. We just don't necessarily have anything that strong at the moment. Yes, there is Melmetal, but Melmetal gets KO'd by a lot of Pokemon, and it doesn't do that much damage. It's also a non-EX Pokemon, so it has less HP than most EX Pokemon do, even though there is the damage reduction effect on Melmetal. So typically, you wouldn't want to lead off with an EX Pokemon and then go into a non-EX Pokemon because, again, they just have to take 2 KOs, and you'd rather them KO 2 EX Pokemon than in 1 EX and a non-EX Pokemon. And just as a general rule of thumb, this deck does have the upside to, like, Pidgeot has 170 HP and Dialga has 150, so you have to get through a really couple high HP Pokemon. So that is something to keep in mind. You can run Blue, you can run Potion. I'm not running Blue in this list, but you know what I get. You know what I'm getting at, right? So damage mitigation, I think, is going to be really important. We want Dialga to stay around as long as possible. But again, really to summarize, I think that the viability of Dialga isn't necessarily going to be based on how strong Dialga is as a card. It's going to really be focused around how strong the cards that we have to pair with Dialga are. Again, if we're really just relying on Mew EX and Tauros to be paired with Dialga, I don't think that in its own right is going to be a top tier strategy. And if we're just pairing Dialga with Pidgeot EX and Wigglytuff EX, I don't think that those are going to be top tier decks in their own right as well. So really, it's going to be reliant on the other Pokemon that we have coming in Spacetime Smackdown and the other supporter cards to help enable Dialga EX or maybe keep it around for longer. Again, I do expect Dialga to be a very good meta deck and a very good meta card, but we really just have to wait and see. There's a lot of cards to come out yet in Spacetime Smackdown, and I'm very confident that those new cards are going to make Dialga much, much better and make these decks much, much better. But in general, there's not much to talk about with Dialga. I think that its viability, again, is just going to be determined on the cards that we can pair with it. Not much to really talk about right now, but yes, the interactions with Mew EX and Tauros are valuable, and technically, yes, we can use it with colorless Pokemon like Pidgeot or Wigglytuff, but in that own right, I don't actually think that that's going to be super overpowered. So Dialga is interesting. I think, again, it's a little bit slow for my blood. I think that the format is a little bit too explosive. Things like, you know, Arcanine do still exist. Things like Charizard, things like Mewtwo, even Pikachu being able to attack for 90 damage on turn 2. Dialga doesn't really love that, especially if Pikachu is going second. You're just going to die on your third turn. And maybe, yes, you can get one Metallic Turbo attack off, but that's really all you've done. You've done 30 damage and accelerated 2 energies. It's not really that useful, right? So we need a way to keep Dialga around for longer. If not, or if there isn't a really strong Pokemon to pair with it, I just don't think that it's actually going to be that good. That's exactly how I'm thinking about it, at least. But I would love to hear your guys' opinions down in the comment section below. So that's going to wrap it up here. We aren't able to kind of build anything super specific, at least at the moment. So we got to keep that in mind. But once the new set comes out and once we get the full set list and we get all of the new cards, we're going to build a bunch of lists. We're going to analyze the meta. We're going to see what the best decks are, what the best strategies are for all the new cards. I'm really, really excited. It's going to open things up tremendously. It's going to make the game a lot more fresh. And from a competitive standpoint, it's going to be very, very fun and very interesting. So don't forget to like the video and don't forget to subscribe. Stay tuned for all of the future videos that we have coming for Spacetime Smackdown and all the new cards. If you want to stay tuned on what the best decks are, what the best strategies are, this is the place for you. So definitely like and subscribe. I would appreciate it. Comment below what you guys think. We'll see you guys next time. Peace out. Have a good one.